There is something deeply strange about the relationship between humans and animals, and it becomes stranger the more you look at it. Humans are one of the most disruptive species that has ever existed on this planet. We cleared forests, built cities, introduced fire, changed landscape, hunted at scale, and fundamentally altered ecosystems across every continent. By every measure of biology and survival, animals should have learned to stay as far away from us as possible. And some did, but a remarkable number of them did the opposite. They moved closer. The story of dogs is the most obvious example, but it is also one of the most misunderstood ones. The common version is that humans domesticated wolves by taming them and selectively breeding the friendly ones. But the more scientists study the genetics and archaeology, the more it looks like process was mutual and possibly driven by the wolves themselves. Around 15 to 40,000 years ago, some wolf populations living near human settlements began scavenging from human waste and food scraps. The wolves that were least afraid of humans had better access to food, they survived better, they had more offsprings, and over generations, the population of wolves that tolerated humans grew, and the ones that were naturally calmer and less aggressive around people gradually diverged from the ones that stayed wild. Humans eventually started actively selecting for specific traits, but the initial move toward coexistence may have started with the animals making a calculated survival decision rather than humans forcing one. Pigeons are another case that people rarely think about seriously. Rock pigeons originally nested on coastal cliffs. When humans started building stone structures in cities, the pigeons recognized the ledges and crevices as structurally identical to cliff faces and moved in. Urban pigeons today are not strays that wandered into the cities. They are generations of birds whose ancestors found that human buildings were a better nesting environment than anything in the wild. Their entire relationship with human urban spaces is built on an accidental architectural resemblance between a cliff and a building, and over generations that preference got encoded into how they behave and where they instinctively look for shelter. Crows are probably the most unsettling example of animal adaptation to human environments because their relationship with us goes beyond tolerance or scavenging. Crows in urban areas have developed behaviors that have no equivalent in wild crow populations. They have learned to use traffic patterns to crack open nuts by dropping them in front of cars and waiting for the light to change before walking out to collect the food. They recognize individual human faces and remember people who have treated them badly, sometimes even for years. They have been documented leaving small gifts for humans who regularly feed them. Their brain to body ratio is comparable to that of great apes, and their behavior in human environments suggests that they are not just adapting to us but actively studying us. The research on urban crow cognition is a serious academic science. They appear to be treating human behavior as a system they can learn and exploit, which is exactly what we do to every environment we enter. Foxes in cities across Europe and North America have undergone measurable behavioral changes within just a few generations of moving into urban areas. Urban foxes are noticeably less fearful of humans than rural foxes, have different sleep patterns, different foraging strategies, and in some populations even have slightly different skull shapes than their rural counterparts, which some researchers believe is related to changes in their diet. The adaptation is happening fast enough that scientists can observe differences between urban and rural fox populations within the same country, sometimes within the same region. Generations of living alongside humans has not just changed their habitats, it has started to change their biology. There are also less obvious examples that rarely come up. Certain spider species have adapted to building webs, specifically in areas with artificial lighting because light attracts insects. Entire spider populations have restructured their behavior around human infrastructure. Some fish populations in rivers near cities have developed measurably different stress responses than fish in remote waterways because of the consistent presence of human activity. Even some insect species in urban areas have started showing genetic differences from rural populations of the same species, driven entirely by the environmental pressures that come up with living near humans. What connects all of these cases is that none of them happened by accident in a way most people imagine. Animals do not just randomly wander near humans and suddenly become comfortable. The process is slow, generational, and often brutal. The individuals that were too afraid or too aggressive did not survive as well in human adjacent environment. The ones that could tolerate proximity, exploit human food sources, or read human behavior well enough to avoid danger had a survival edge. That edge got passed down, and over enough generations, what started as individual variation became a population trait, and in some cases started showing up in the actual genetics of the species. Humans walked into almost every ecosystem ecosystem on Earth and forced every living thing in those ecosystems to make a choice. Most species could not adapt fast enough and their populations collapsed or retreated. But a specific group of animals across wildly different species made a different kind of choice. They learned that being near the most disruptive thing on the planet was actually safer than being away from it. That the food scrap, the shelter, the warmth, the predictable patterns of human behavior were worth the risk of proximity. And over thousands of years of the calculation being made by the individual animals who survived because of it, the entire species revived themselves around us. The strange part is not that animals adapted to humans. The strange part is how many of them chose to.